Hello and welcome everybody to my very first episode of Fumbling Forward. My name is Maurizio and I feel truly blessed that you joined me for my very first pilot episode here on YouTube. So, Fumbling Forward is a channel about role-playing games, specifically tabletop role-playing games. You know, the strange hobby where you sit around a table with your pals telling each other stories and using rules that need 20-sided dice or 12-sided dice or 10-sided dice, and you got like rule books that are so heavy that you could kill your grandmother with it. Yes, that's tabletop role-playing in a nutshell. So we're not only gonna talk about role-playing games in general, but specifically about the job as a game master. So the game master is the one guy, normally the one guy at the table, who is kind of the director for the narrative you're all gonna play and create together. And he also is the one who has all the rules in his head. And if he doesn't have them in his head, he has it in his, the big book with which he could kill his grandmother. What's up with this grandmother thing? It's strange. The other part of Fumbling Forward is talking about creating your own role-playing games, developing your own role-playing games, and how you can come up with interesting rules, interesting setting ideas, and how to match both with each other. So for my very first episode, I want to talk about my style of game mastering, and it's called Scenic game mastering. Because it's based on scenic narration. I think that's a very good starting point for this channel, because we're gonna talk about quite a lot of stuff that scenic game mastering is the basis to. So before we dive right into the topic, I would like to take one little minute to talk about myself and to introduce myself to you. My name is Maurizio and I'm from Germany. I'm a hobbyist, game master and game developer for tabletop role-playing games, and as you maybe can imagine, I have quite a lot of experience in game mastering and my unique play style. So everything I'm gonna talk about is my personal view on how game mastering works best, not necessarily the best game mastering period. So as always with game mastering, game developing and gaming in general, there are several different styles and ways to go about it, and I only will cover the one I am familiar with and I think is best. I'm a game master for I think like 12 years now. I play in regular groups each week, and I develop my own role-playing game for approximately 7 years now. As you can imagine, there were quite a few drawbacks during this 7 years. Nobody should actually take 7 years for developing their own role-playing game, to be honest. But I'm here to try to help you avoid making the same mistakes as I did. And coming about your game idea a lot faster than I have, because I started over like 20 times. So if you are from Germany and interested in more stuff I'm doing, I'm also part of a podcasting group about role-playing games. It's called Pen and Podcast. You will find the link to this podcast here below. And I also am a host of my own podcast called Hinterm Schirm. It's also a German podcast, as you maybe heard, and it's about game mastering and game developing. So many of the stuff you will be hearing in Fumbling Forward is also part of Hinterm Schirm. And if you're interested in further analysis of game mastering styles and how to develop your own game. So with no further ado, let's dive right into the juicy bits of this episode. We're talking about scenic role-playing. And scenic role-playing, as I said before, is a specific kind of structuring your narration and a specific kind of game mastering style. In my opinion, there are two big branches of how you can structure your campaign or your sessions, and those are called narration-driven style and simulation-driven style. Okay, as you see, I'm quite interested in the theoretical part of role-playing. So many of the topics on this channel are gonna be quite theoretical. Yeah, I hope you're okay with that and stay with me. I'm gonna explain to you in detail what I mean, and it's not so complicated as it may seem now from the get-go. So you got these two styles, and they are quite easy to distinguish. The narrationist style, or the narration-driven style, is more of a cinematic approach to structuring your narration, whereas the simulationist style is more naturalistic. So imagine you as a game master are not only the narrator but also the cameraman. So you decide which specific aspects of your story are shown to the players and are played by your players. Okay, let's give you an example. Let's say your players or your group, the characters of your players just entered a new metropolis, a city. And the first thing they want to do is go to the tavern. Every character always wants, at some point in the story, go to the tavern. And now you have several different options. You could start with them entering the gates of the specific city, let them walk through the streets, narrate each street by itself, and at some point they manage to actually find the tavern. Maybe they have to ask around where the tavern is, and some friendly NPCs gonna help them. But at some point they will find the tavern, and then yeah, we can move on from there. That's the one way. The other way is the more cinematic way. If we decide that the journey from the city gates to the tavern is actually quite boring and there's nothing really happening in there, we can just skip this. We can just say, okay, you want to go to the tavern? Bam, you're at the tavern. Opening the door to the tavern. Now what do? You see, we're skipping certain parts of the narration to get the story, to move the story forward and to drive the story, to get to the juicy bits of the evening. That's a more cinematic approach, and we call that approach narration-driven, or I would say scenic game mastering style. For those of you who are really into role-playing theory, there is a specific term that is normally associated with really bad game mastering, and it's called railroading. The term means that your story is like a train on rails, and your characters can't branch out to the left or to the right. They can only go one way, and that's the way the rails gonna lead them. And in this specific analogy, you as a GM are the rails. You decide where the characters go, and if the characters want to do something else that's not in your story, you as a GM try to get them back on the tracks. So normally the big advantage of tabletop role-playing games, in contrast to maybe PC role-playing games or console role-playing games, is that your characters are able to do whatever they want. Your players can say, okay, I don't want to go to the tavern, or I don't want to fight a dragon, don't want to talk to this very important NPC, I would rather kill him and eat his flesh. Okay, maybe not eating his... Okay, you can, but you shouldn't, and never mind. So you get the gist. And we're gonna talk about railroading in detail in a future episode. So, normally one could argue that scenic role-playing is a kind of railroading. Why is that? Scenic role-playing takes away some of the agency of the players because you don't have this naturalistic approach. Going back to our example, players are at the gate, at the city gates, and they want to journey to the local tavern. Now, how they do that is up to them. And you, as a GM, could give them the opportunity to explore the city by themselves. So you're at the city gates, and there's this main road, this main street right in front of you. There's several dozen citizens walking about, doing their day-to-day business. There are merchants there. There are city guards there. Different alleyways you could use, and you could explore. What do you want to do? So this approach, by asking the players how they want to go about finding the local tavern, is a very naturalistic approach, because you as a GM don't decide what's happening. You don't take away the agency from the players. The players decide by themselves, okay, I want to ask one of the guards. Okay, good, go to the guards. The players go to the guard and ask, good day, dear sir, I want to go to the tavern. Do you know the way around? And the guards also, yes, of course, I know the way around. Who are you? And yeah, and so on and so on. Yeah, you could argue that's kind of boring and everybody is like falling asleep, but that's a naturalistic approach, and you don't take away any agency from the players, and you show everything. Like I said, when you imagine you as a GM are a cameraman, the camera in the simulationist approach is never off. You show everything. Of course, there are gray areas. I'm talking about the extreme on the one side, and in the extreme simulationist approach, the camera is never off. So you would actually show that characters taking a dump. Maybe not taking a dump, but you know what I mean. By skipping all that, that's taking away agency from the players in some way. I think every GM is doing that. We all do not show each and every path of the life of our characters. We all like to narrate specific scenes which have conflict, because conflict drives our story. Of course, sometimes it can be very nice to give the characters some room for themselves to decide where they want to go next, what they want to explore. But in the end, we decide which aspects of the journey or which aspects of the life of our characters, as a GM, we're gonna show our players. In our example, I think it's a very good example for showing the general idea of scenic role-playing, but we can take this whole approach a little bit further. By deciding which scenes we're gonna show our players, we can, to a certain extent, help ourselves coming up with great story ideas. So for example, maybe I come up with a specific scene in my head where some bandits are gonna lay a trap for the characters on the road. So I wouldn't skip the road, obviously, because I want the players to encounter those bandits on the road. So you see, there is a specific idea behind which scene I'm gonna show and which scene I'm gonna skip. And the aspect that is most important for me to decide if I'm gonna show something or not is there conflict? And is this conflict interesting for my storyline? So, as I said, when I start a game session, I'm normally sitting in my bathtub and taking down some notes. And those notes are all about different scenes and the conflict in those scenes. So for example, I know that the party is gonna journey from city A to city B. And while I'm sitting there in the bathtub, I'm thinking about, okay, is there something on the way from city A to city B that's pretty interesting? Is there something I can come up with that's gonna make a great story and that's gonna introduce a great conflict to the story? If not, I'm gonna skip that. So for me, the most important thing is there something to narrate, or is it just like, okay, I'm showing it because, yeah, the characters have to walk all those miles to get to the story, to get to the city. But journeys can be quite problematic in a way that if you always skip the journey because you find them boring or you don't like this road movie style events on the side road, players can easily lose their sense for distance. So specifically in a medieval setting, distances are quite a heavy burden for characters. So moving from one city to another can take several weeks or even months. To not lose this sense of distance, I sometimes find it very important to come up with some ideas for the journey and to maybe spend an evening or two on a journey and developing ideas and plot hooks specifically for the way from point A to point B. So as you can imagine, scenic role-playing is all about pacing. And pacing is a term coming from narration and constructing stories in general. You will find it in books, you will find it in movies, and it's about how things progress inside a greater narrational construct and how fast they progress. It's like the heartbeat of a story, if you want to take this analogy. Each beat is a conflict that drives the story ahead and gives the story some kind of momentum, and the space between each beat can be longer or can be shorter, and this rhythm is called pacing. And sometimes it's very important to slow down the pacing to give the characters space, because if a character is always only confronted with conflicts and doesn't have time to maybe just sit around a campfire and talking and reflecting about the things that happened to them, it's gonna get too stressful. For example, I talk with a good friend of mine. He told me, okay, if you're gonna construct a horror game, for example, if there's constant fear and constant terror inside your campaign or even in your session, then it's not gonna work the same way as if you have some downtime, some feeling of relief, some comic relief, and then going back to this straight forward hammering in the terror into the characters. So you need this up and down, and that's good pacing. Coming up with conflict after conflict after conflict, it's getting dull at a certain point. So it's important to find the right rhythm for your story, and that's something we're going to talk about specifically in another episode. But scenic role-playing can do other things as well if you take examples that are more problematic, I would say, in the eye of some game masters with different play styles. So let's imagine we have a group of 3 people. We have Carl, he's a dwarf. We have Otto, he's a human, and we have Richard, he's an elf. So Carl, Otto, and Richard each want to do a different thing. So maybe Carl decides he wanna visit the blacksmith now. So I'm gonna visit the blacksmith now. And Otto decides, okay, I'm a human. I need money. We all need money. So he's visiting the local bank. And the last one is Richard, the elf. He maybe decides, okay, he wanna smoke some fantasy weed in a bar. So each of them is going off to some different locations. So now something interesting is happening with Scenic role-playing. Okay, now we got our 3 characters, and one of them, as you know, is Otto. And as we said, Otto is going to the bank. And maybe we decide as a GM, okay, when Otto is gonna visit the bank, there will be like a robbery taking place. So actually Otto is waltzing into a robbery. So as Otto enters the place through the front door, maybe the robbery already took place, and the bandits turn around with sacks full of money and coins, and they see Otto waltzing in through the front door. And Otto, being Otto and a hero, he's unsheathing his sword and calls them to surrender. So now we got a conflict in this scene, and that was the reason why we actually decided to show this scene. As you remembered, in Scenic Roleplaying, we could have just said, okay, we're skipping this part of the story because there's nothing interesting happening at the bank, so there's no need for us to actually show what Otto is doing there. But since we decided, okay, there will be a robbery taking place, it's maybe more interesting, and let's show that. Okay, so far so good. Now, what we could do is taking one of the other characters, for example, Carl, who was at the blacksmith, and putting him in the scene, pulling him to this scene, to Otto's scene. Okay, and now things get interesting. The player of Carl never decided by himself to move to the bank after he visited the blacksmith. Maybe he only wanted to get a new axe, or to sharpen his weapons, and then maybe moving to the tavern to his friend Richard the elf. But you as a GM decided it would be more interesting for the dwarf Carl to have a scene with the human Otto in the bank while there's a robbery taking place, because there are several different reasons for this. The first reason could be maybe it's an interesting dynamic between Otto and Carl going on, and you wanted a scene with both of them alone, without Richard, so they can maybe resolve some conflicts between them. Maybe it's interesting because Otto is normally not the quite aggressive guy, and Carl is very aggressive, being a dwarf. So there could be a conflict of interests between them if they are both confronted with the conflict of the robbers. But whatever reasons there are, you decided that the dwarf Carl is introduced to the scene of Otto being at the bank. So you took away agency from Carl's player. It's totally okay to do that, in my opinion. Some of the GMs will now say, oh my god, okay, that's totally railroading. Carl never decided to visit the bank, and that's totally railroading, and never do that. But I think unless you're doing something that is totally against the motivations of a character. For example, let's say the dwarf Carl swore an oath never to visit any bank. Then it would be a very bad idea to come up with this way of introducing Carl to the scene. But unless there's a real good reason for Carl not to help out his friend, although at the bank, why not? Obviously, Carl could have said, okay, I want to visit Richard because I have some stuff I want to go over with Richard concerning our next adventures, and so I would never decide to go to the bank. And it's totally fine if the player of Carl decides, okay, excuse me, GM, I don't want to go to the bank. After the blacksmith, I clearly decided to go to Richard, and that's okay. So you go with that, and you say, okay, sorry, you're not in the scene, although you play the scene by yourself. That's totally fine. But in my experience, most players are quite okay with them being pushed to certain scenes, because they then get interesting new opportunities for them to act, because you as a GM in scenic role-playing, your job, it's your job to come up with interesting conflicts. You actively decide which scenes you're gonna show, and therefore you should have a very good idea or a very good selection mechanism, which scene is interesting and which is not. And so generally players can trust you and come to trust you in your decision whether a scene is interesting for them or not. So if I decide that it would be a great scene for Carl to help Otto at the bank, normally my players trust me that it's a real good decision. If I, for some reason, did not calculate that, for example, Otto does not have any motivation to do that or to be there whatsoever, then as I said, that's totally okay and that's totally fine, and we can skip that part and leave Otto there alone, and maybe even decide that Richard, totally baked, enters the bank instead. You can create certain constellations in scenes without asking the players to do so. And it's a specific style of narrating, and the players should know that this is your style. But it helps you a lot, especially in scenes where characters are separated from each other, and you can get them back together again. As you probably noticed, this format and Fumbling Forward in general is not railroaded. I tend to digress from the path and touch certain side topics all the time. But I think for a first overview of what scenic role-playing can do, for the first episode, that's enough. The term scenic role-playing is a little bit clearer now. I think there's some aspects that are quite confusing still, but we're gonna clear them up in future episodes, especially how to create your own scenes, how to pick the right ingredients, and what the right ingredients are for creating really great scenes. Obviously, there are many more aspects about what scenic role-playing can do and can't do, and there are quite a few question marks still there, and we're gonna try to reduce them to zero in future episodes. So if you got some comments, critique, praise, or just want to contact me or give some warm words to me and support me, please hit the comment section below. I will comment you back on those as soon as I see them. And also, if you like this first video of mine, please consider also to give me a thumbs up or even subscribe to my channel. That would be really awesome, because as you already know, this is my very first episode and my very first channel here on YouTube, and I would really appreciate to create a whole community here. Last but not least, I want to give a big shout out to those YouTubers who inspired me to move on with this endeavor and to create my own YouTube channel. Surprisingly, they are not tabletop role-playing channels, tabletop role-playing YouTubers, but they are Dark Souls lore hunters. So maybe you know the game Dark Souls and Bloodborne. They are the lore hunters. They dissect the game and look for clues about the storyline, the hidden storyline in those games. And I really enjoy watching their channels, and they through their very good content, they inspired me to come up with my own channel. So a big shout out to JSF, Sinclair Lore, and Aegon of Astora. I linked your channels in the comment section below, so if you're like me and you not only enjoy talking extensively about tabletop role-playing games, but also enjoy lore hunting in the worlds of Dark Souls and Bloodborne, please consider taking a look at the aforementioned great creators of lore hunting videos. And if you enjoyed my video, please also consider visiting me again. I think I will upload the next video next week. If you want to stay tuned to what I'm doing in my free time and to when I will upload the next video, maybe also consider visiting my Twitter page. I also put it in the video description. Until then, thanks for watching guys, and have a very great week.